Yo, what is up, everybody? John from Tout Tactics here, bringing you another video. Today we have a very special guest on the channel. It is Colin Kay, who's currently the #2 player in the world and is local to my meta here in Denver. Colin most recently has been playing Bringers of Flame Sisters, so we discussed the matchup from the Sisters player's perspective, where we believe the key interactions are between specific units, and how Tau can win the matchup. We also chat through Kroot units and what what changes we would like to see to them, the upcoming Blood Angels Codex and how that's going to change the meta moving forward, and how that might change how Tau players interact with Blood Angels players. And then lastly, we talk a little bit about teams building. I reveal a little bit of my teams list for Champions Cup coming up here in a couple weeks. But without further ado, let's just get right into it. But cool, man. Yeah, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, the reason I wanted to bring you on today, obviously you're an expert in the meta and where it's at, and yeah, I was really curious, like, just from first of all, if you got a chance to watch the video of the Town Sisters matchup overview by chance.
I
Um,
did, yeah.
yep, and curious what your opinion on my takes were, like if I got it right, if there was anything that I got wrong there, or um, yeah, just curious to get the other side of the story, I guess.
Yeah, so I think, for the most part, you were on point, at least for sure, in identifying kind of what the key sisters units are. And I think identifying Bringers of Flame is the real thing. I mean, okay, Stephen Box won a GT with Army of Faith, but that's one of one. Basically, none of the detachments other than Bringers of Flame have seen any success.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to tell whether that's, a chicken and egg kind of thing. Is that because Bringers of Flame is so good and nobody's trying the other ones? Or is it because the other ones aren't good and Bringers of Flame is the only good one?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more of the first one because Bringers is just so much ludicrously better than everything else
Yeah,
that there's no point in even trying anything else if you're just playing to win.
sure.
But yeah, in the context of that, I mean, if you're going to play to beat Sisters, you have to understand and know what to do against the Triumph, the Volgons, Dominions, and
Mm-hmm.
Immolators. And if you don't have an answer to probably at least two of those, then it's probably pretty hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say the biggest thing to pay attention to in like what you said in your recap is just that you won't always tell between sisters players how they're going to prioritize their units
Mm-hmm.
because for me I prioritize, and this is not like a unique perspective for me, but I prioritize my Volgons over everything. I will
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice everything in my army if it takes it to keep them alive. Because if I have that unit kicking around for 5 turns of the game, I feel like there's not many games where that happens and I lose.
Yep.
Whereas some people will be like, all right, I'm going to prioritize the Triumph because the Triumph gives me all my buffs and makes my army go. So I'm going to protect her and X, Y, and Z. So
Mm-hmm.
I would just, that's kind of the biggest identifier matchup based wise. And I think that's probably very similar to what it would imprint to on a Tau matchup because Volgons and the Tau are probably one of our best units
Yeah.
just because the ability to actually credibly kill multiple things a turn.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
And yeah, I thought it was really interesting when we talked, and I noticed like the way you like to play the Triumph isn't usually like other people, right? I feel like other people, like you mentioned, they kind of castle around her a little bit, but you like to throw her in the middle of the table pretty early on the game, which I think I like that play a lot because it is just an annoying unit to kill. Not a lot of armies have the tools. Like obviously it's a T3 body, but it has 18 wounds and a 4 invuln. Like even if you do commit real units to kill it, the odds you kill it is like slim to none. And at that point, the Sisters player probably already has the positioning it needed from the turns 1 and 2 push from the Triumph being there. That it's like fairly insignificant to take her out at that point.
yeah. And so for me, the Triumph is she's the most impactful turns 1 and 2
Mm-hmm.
because you get the guaranteed 6 miracle dice, which
Yep.
means I can do the auto 6 advance on one of the key units to get angles turn 1 or turn 2.
Mm-hmm.
And really past turn 2, it's unlikely that you super need the +2 move, +1 advance because you're either on each other or you're already shot them kind of heavily. And so I'm a little bit more kind of like liberal with how I use her in the middle turns of the game. But generally for me, the turn I'll push her out into the middle is the turn I'm pushing with my army.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm pushing my Volgons, my Immolators, my Castigators, that's the turn I want to push the Triumph because, okay, if you're going to dedicate the resources to kill the Triumph, that you can't kill her with insignificant volume.
Mm-mm.
And so anything you're putting into her is stuff that isn't going into those other things.
Mm-hmm.
And if you kill her, then that means a non-negligible amount of those things live, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah, because then the clapback is just brutal. Like,
Yeah,
you no
and I've
longer
had
need the
games where I
buffs.
push and people go for the Triumph, they kill her, and it's like, okay, you killed her and like an immolator, but the rest of it's unmolested, and now I just destroy you.
Yeah, it's all the damage is still there on the table. Yeah, it's gross. Um, yeah, I'm curious, like, what you thought of, because here's one area where I'm not totally sure as the Tau player what you want to do into Sisters, right? It feels like to me that I want to be going into when I still have my detachment roll, like,
Right.
because, and also like later on in the game you're charging your units up still. Like, you could play the slow scoring game where you're just using dominions and, like, you throw a castigator on an objective in an awkward spot. It's like hard to trade with sisters, so it feels like you kind of just build up to a big clash and like see who ends up on top.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm kind of curious what you think of, like, prospectively as the sisters player. Like, how would the Tau player make it difficult on you in your game plan, I guess?
So it's actually one of the few matchups that is probably the most at least in my play experience with it, is the most predicated on something as simple as the attacker defender role.
Yeah,
Because if you win that role and you have Pathfinders, which every Tau player has Pathfinders, it
of
feels like,
course. Has to.
you're going to line those up right in front of my deployment zone.
Yeah.
You're going to stop my scout moves. You're going to stop my novitiates infiltrating,
Mhm.
things like that. And that just inherently just entirely changes the complexion of the game.
Mhm.
So I feel like playing into Tau, I have to have two entirely different game plans. I have to have a game plan where you drop first and a game plan where I drop first, because those game plans play totally differently.
Yeah,
Because the
absolutely.
one where you drop first, I feel like I have to play a more kind of conservative, kind of wait till turn 3 and I can kill your screens and then eventually get out type of game plan. Whereas if I drop first, I can just play aggressively like normal.
Mhm.
And those are obviously not the same at all.
Mhm.
So I think ways that you could impact my game plan, which generally the Bringers of Flame game plan is, I want to push you with all my damage on the same turn
Mhm.
because I'm fast enough to do that.
Mhm.
And the ways you can prevent that is keeping things in transports, keeping things fully behind ruins. Because against bringers, you can't like halfway commit to hiding
Mhm.
with how fast the units are.
Yep.
You either have to full commit to hiding or just don't do it at all.
Yep.
And just make it so that, yes, I can kill stuff on a go turn, but I can't kill all your damage, and make it so that your crackback is like, okay, I killed all your devilfish, but all the breachers are there.
Mhm.
And now you pick up all my retributors and things like that.
Mhm.
And it almost feels like you have to play into my game plan more than I have to play into yours.
Mhm.
Because if we just kind of plink at each other for 5 turns,
Yeah.
I'm probably going to come out of that exchange better
Yep.
because miracle dice, things like that, I don't have to do as much meaningful things as you do because I effectively can cheat.
Yeah.
And you can do good damage, but you can only do damage in the sense that I let you do it, because I can fully hide my Volgons behind a ruin where you'd never be able to see them
Mhm.
and still move fast enough to get out and shoot things on the turn I want to do something with them. And so it's not unwinnable by any stretch. You just have to show a little bit of restraint in make it so that I'm expending, 5 girls here and 5 girls there to go tag something or do an objective, and you just steadily kill those and make me win the game with the Volgons and a couple castigators and things like that, and just make my options less appealing. Like, okay, well, I have to go do cleanse or deploy teleport homers with the castigator
Mhm.
if I want to do it. Do I care about 2 points there or 4 points or whatever, or do I want to shoot it? Because then you start getting into real kind of like decisions where it's like, okay, well, so he didn't take the 4 points and he shot. Yeah, he did some damage, but now that's 4 less points you have. And the games that I've come close to losing with Sisters are games where my opponents take away my secondary pieces
Mhm.
and basically try and make me win the game on scoring with the big stuff. And the only reason I've won those games is just because I've managed to take their pieces off the field and reduce their scoring as well.
Mhm.
But that would be my take on how you could really affect my line. I would say don't try and play the aggressive game with me
Mm-hmm.
because I can play aggressive better than you can.
Yeah.
You can play conservative better than I can
You think so?
because you have longer range shooting than
Yeah.
me, generally speaking, other than castigators.
Sure. Yeah, that is
So,
the one benefit, and I think um, something interesting that you mentioned was just like the range advantage. And I find a win condition against me a lot of times is what you just described. Honestly, as a sisters player, is taking away the scoring pieces and just leaving me with things like Riptides, breacher units, like stuff I don't really want to be activating for just scoring. I want to be activating for them for damage as well.
right.
Um, and one thing I did want to ask you about was your list is a little bit different than other people's lists. So I'm just
Yes.
curious, yeah, because you've got the retributors, you've got the sustained one enhancement on one of them, which I think is really great. I Before we get into that though, I wanted to tell you just like a little anecdote, which was something that I also mentioned in the video, which is I just reached out to Richard Ziegler before the tournament because I was trying to before the GT that we were both at because I was
Yeah.
trying to like figure out like how can I beat a sisters list because I knew you were gonna be there and like I wanted to win and like to win a GT like
Yeah.
you're gonna have to beat like the go through you basically. So his suggestion into beating sisters was doing mass like breacher spam, which I thought was interesting. I'm personally not like a that's like not really my skill set per se. So I went in a different direction, but I'm curious like what you think of that as like an archetype. If you were gonna build a list to say like, hey, I wanna beat sisters. Do you think that's viable? Like bringing like 40 or 50 breachers with -1 to wound, just
So I definitely think it could be because it would be more technical than it would seem on the surface to on how to actually use it.
for sure.
Um, but sisters, especially the Bringers of Flame builds,
Mhm.
and especially mine that doesn't have the Seraphim. I know a lot of people run that. It's probably slightly different with the Seraphim, but you have ways to deal with that.
Mhm.
Is we don't actually have a ton of stuff we like generally want to shoot into infantry.
Mhm.
Like I know castigators are good, but in my list outside of castigators, it's like Vol's heavy bolter and stuff like that. I mean, and like, look, meltas will kill infantry, but like, if I have other targets to put meltas into, it's not a desired target.
Yeah.
And there's a real world where, yeah, I could kill 20 to 30 in a turn, but that would be all my attacks. That would be everything.
Mhm.
And that could potentially leave me very exposed. But that would be something where if you had a particularly effective like launching point, you could realistically pick up most of my infantry bodies, if not close to all of them in one turn. And even if you lose 30 guys on the crackback, that would be a trade I would push the lever on every single time because now I just have nothing but tanks and war suits,
Mhm.
and I feel like that's a hard position to win out of. So it would really put the onus on me to make sure that I either leave guys in transports, which means they're not shooting,
Mhm.
or uh, heavily kind of play more conservatively to not get shot by those things, which also means I'm not pushing you with some of my stuff.
Mhm.
So I think there's almost kind of like a it's almost like a kind of a Cold War situation at that point where you're like, all right, well, I'm not going to push you because I don't want to get all my infantry killed in one turn by breachers.
Uh-huh.
And then you're like, all right, well, I don't necessarily have to push you because I'm going to just try and hit you from range.
Mhm.
And then I think that just kind of comes down to who positions their stuff better and gets a good push turn. Because at some point, you do have to go.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of, okay, have I done enough around the edges to go? Because, I kind of play 40K like I play Call of Duty. Like I never play down the middle. I just
Mhm.
play on the edges.
Mhm.
Pick pieces off around the edges and just kind of like keep the board where it's in my favor. Because anything down the middle, usually in any kind of like war game, is just dead,
Mhm.
and you have to accept that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to push. I don't want to put things in the middle unless either I'm okay with them dying or I don't think you have the capacity to kill them because I've sufficiently neutered you.
Mhm.
But I think that would cause a very interesting game dynamic where I probably don't push for a few turns because I would lose half my army. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that'd be interesting. I don't. I actually I haven't run into a breacher spam list since like eighth edition, but I would. Yeah,
They're it's interesting because they got bumped in points a lot, people love the Cadre Fireblade Breacher combo and the Devilfish. That's now 235 points for the package, which is
Yeah.
a lot. You know what I mean? And it takes a lot of resources, I would say, to get enough out of it with so much like you have armor contempt, right? So you need to put the extra AP on the breachers if I'm punching up into something like the Volgons, right? Just to get you on 3Fs. Um,
Right.
and that happens a lot, right? With like another example would be like Deathwing Knights. Breachers are like one of our best units into them.
Yep.
But you need the extra AP. So they're very resource intensive, but as like an MSU skirmisher, for 100 points just for the breacher unit on foot, with assault the whole game, with access to auto advance 6 for all 5 turns in Mont'ka.
Yep.
I think it could be really interesting. In my at RMO, I just ran 3 breacher units solo. I still had 2 devilfish, but at least that brought the package down. Like I think it brought it down 150 points by not taking the Cadre Fireblade, so I could still keep like my damage pieces, which was important. So I don't know if it's the answer in this meta, but it certainly could help if you're building a list. I think just specifically into sisters.
And I think there's something to be said too for potentially like, all right, you're like kind of almost suicide them. You take a
Yeah,
breacher
you
unit,
don't feel bad about it
get,
either.
get out, use your auto advance 6, get behind a wall, kill 1 or 2 groups of 5 girls, accept that they die in the crackback, and then whatever kills them, if it's anything important, just be like, all right, 1 CP full hit rerolls the rest of the game against that.
Yeah,
You
seriously.
know,
And the hard part about the using the breacher unit right now is I do feel like I'm protecting it almost. Like
yeah,
it's like I need to get value out of it. And I found that when I was running 3 breacher fireblades, that one of them would always be used for something that they like really shouldn't have been in their job description, right? Whether it was just like,
right.
all right, well, I need to get area denial with something, and there's a big monster that I'm going to do basically no damage to with the breachers, but I got to throw them on the objective, or I need to flip a primary point. Um, so I've toyed around with the idea of just running the 2 breacher fireblades and maybe just the 1 solo. Um, but that kind of does lead me into my next question, which is around list building and like how you build lists for like the specific meta. I'm curious like why you teched more into like the anti-monster, anti-vehicle sort of matchups as opposed to like anti-horde.
Yeah, so I think the big thing is obviously the kind of quote true horde lists. Green Tide, I guess you can technically say the Kroot Hunting Pact, the Unending Swarm, they all got nerfed in the last data slate where they can only bring back a full unit one time.
Mhm.
I know Green Tide couldn't bring back a full unit, but still,
Mhm.
they got nerfed in other ways. And I also sometimes you just have to make a tech call in terms of okay, if I really go to a large size GT,
Mhm.
then how many of these type of armies would I expect to see? And if I went to like a 60-player event, I'd be like, maybe there'd be 1 to 2 true horde players.
Mhm.
And then I have to tell myself, okay, can I beat that list? Like anything that's just a loss, I try to make sure I have an answer to because I don't want to. I don't want to just rely on. Okay, well, I hope I don't play them.
Mhm.
So, in my experience playing against hordes, is even Melta heavy sisters have enough dice to kill them because by and large they're not really killing you back.
Mhm.
And when I get to activate with all that stuff for 4 or 5 turns, mostly you'll still end up tabling them.
Mhm.
And I think that's one thing a lot of people don't realize about the horde matchup, especially the horde matchups that don't do a lot of damage,
Mhm.
is that most armies have enough dice to kill them,
Yep.
and especially when you get to roll them all for 5 turns. So I wasn't super worried about that, and I figured since that's not really a huge issue, I may as well just hard go into the other matchups, which is just any kind of marine style list, Necrons, with Satan and monoliths,
Mhm.
um, any kind of Tyrannid monsters, because those are very popular over here, and big demons.
Mhm.
All that stuff really hates getting detonated on by Sisters Melta turn after turn after turn.
Mhm.
Because Sisters Melta is not regular Melta. Stat wise, it is, but I can get 2 through and do, you know, 16 damage.
Yeah. Oh
Whereas
yeah.
somebody else can get 2 through and do maybe 6 damage. But for me, if it matters, that's never going to happen because I
Mhm.
have Miracle Dice.
Yeah.
So they're not the same. And the other thing too is that I I like to really make when I tech my list. I like to I didn't come up with this phrase, but it's tech for the best, outplay the rest.
Mhm.
And So I like to tech for the top of the meta and then just hope that I'm going to be a good enough general and my units are good enough that I can
Mm-hmm.
just overcome the other matchups. So like into a matchup where the Melta isn't as meaningful, like maybe like an all infantry army or whatever. It's like, okay, you killed the 1 wound guy, you killed the 2 wound guy, fine, whatever. And I'm hoping I'm just going to be able to be a better player than that person or that army in specific. That the power of sisters can overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, I can throw all my energy into making a 53-47 kind of matchup
Mm-hmm.
that's, in their favor to maybe a 53-47 matchup in my favor
Mm-hmm.
because I've skewed so hard into that. So, like, for example, if I had taken less Melta and tried to kind of have a more all-arounder list,
Mm-hmm.
then I feel like a matchup into something like Demons might be slightly harder because now I'm having less things that can credibly kill these larger monsters.
Mm-hmm.
But with all the Melta I have, that matchup goes from what I think is kind of a push with a good Demons player
Mm-hmm.
to something that I feel kind of favored into
Mm-hmm.
because I can credibly kill multiple big things a turn
Yep.
as opposed to maybe one or two.
Sure.
So that's kind of really the motivation is that I'm just teching for the top
Mm-hmm.
because, and it's not arrogant because as somebody who's going into a tournament, my personal expectation is I'm trying to win the event,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So I'm expecting whoever's the players I think are going to be at the top are the players I'm teching for because if I'm going to win the event, it's like you said earlier. Okay, I expect I have to go through this person and this person and this person,
Mm-hmm.
and if one of them's playing demons, and for whatever reason my list just can't beat demons, then I'm not actually going to that event to win because I'm showing up to an event where somebody's playing an army who I expect to play through, but I
Mm-hmm.
can't play into.
Yep.
So you just can't do that if you actually have an expectation to win an event.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I think like as someone who's gone like 4-2 at a lot of GTs, I've gone 5-1 at one. I think that's like an area of that I could be better at is like in list building, putting myself in a better chance to win games because I feel like I personally favor like flexible units as opposed to like skewing it towards like my perspective of the meta, if that makes sense, or like my perspective of who's going to be at the top. I I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I just didn't expect at that last GT how much beef there was going to be. Like,
Yeah,
dude, like there was how many demons players were there? Where there was just a bunch of monsters.
I
I think it
mean,
was three at least.
literally my last 2 rounds, round 5 and round 6, I played 2 demons monster mashes.
Yeah. And then I played against like a Bane sword or whatever. I was just like, what the heck is going on here, man? Like,
Right.
and there was the Tesseract Vault list. There was just skews all over the place. Trey was running his Chaos Cults. It was just wild. Like I don't know what I was expecting, but that wasn't it. And so it also kind of I yeah, it also kind of makes me think about like the larger meta in general with like the Blood Angels Codex coming up.
Yep.
Oh, before we get to that, I am one thing I did want to ask you about was I watched your game last week at War Games Live, which I'll link down below so everyone could go watch it. It was a good game, and
Thanks.
I yeah, turn one the demons player shoved you really hard,
He
and
did. Yeah.
yeah, I was just curious like you just sent it right back at him. So I was curious like from your perspective like going into that game kind of where your head was at because I believe he went first, which was really good for you, right? Because he can't pull the
It
demons
was
off.
good. Yeah.
And obviously helped a lot in the matchup. But I'm curious, like, what your thought process was, prior to the game, like your perspective of what your win conditions were, and then when turn one happened and you were like, all right, screw it, like it's time to shove my whole army. How you kind of came to that conclusion?
So going into the game, I've played Jordan and his this exact list he has
Really?
before, and so I'm very familiar with how powerful it is. I mean, all the big stuff has 4-up invulns.
Mm-hmm.
The keepers are -1 to hit even in shooting. I mean, all the big demons have 5-up feel no pain, and so in a similar vein to how you can't really rely on math against sisters because of miracle dice and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Math is very odd against his list as well because of how many different levels of defense there are to it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's quite killy as well. Um, I think the thing I went in there knowing is that in order to beat this list, I have to be willing to play it like a game of chess, to be willing to sacrifice pieces
Mm-hmm.
to keep around my other pieces, and just make sure that the 2 or 3 most important pieces are there for the whole game,
Mm-hmm.
and exploit his weakness, which is it's not wasn't terrible, but credible long range shooting.
Mm-hmm.
against him. So you'll see at some point during the game, I have my Volgons in a corner, like in the kind of bottom middle of the map,
Yep.
and I have them tri-pointed by tanks,
Yeah.
so he can't charge them.
Mhm.
And it's like, all right, you can kind of plink at them, but that means your shooting isn't killing like retributors on the ground and things like that. And I kind of knew going in there is I want the Volgons to activate as many turns as I can get out of them,
Mhm.
and I want the retributors to be on a different side than the Volgons, because the real big thing with his list is you do not want him, because he's operating at a loss in terms of units. He only has a few units that credibly do things.
Mhm.
They're good units, but only has a few. And so I wanted to spread him out as much as possible. I didn't want a castle, because if I castle, then you get scenarios where like Shalaxi charges and she can hit like 3 things.
Mhm.
And that's terrible.
That,
I want her hitting like 1 thing when she charges.
yeah. So I'm curious, like, what you think of the new Blood Angels book. Um, Man, I mean, it seems like it's gonna be heavily points dependent, but every detachment getting access to advance in charge really makes it really weird for me as a top player. I mean, I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but Blood Angels is a pretty good matchup for Tau, for Sons of Sanguinius, in my opinion, because they really just don't have a lot of, like, once you pick up their scoring units, they just have a bunch of big bombs, and typically they're only running like 3 or 4 scoring units, like a couple JPIs, something to hold their home, maybe a Cowardice, and like a couple ball predators if they're lucky. But like that list, once I pick up the trash, it's just a bunch of units that are trying to table me, which I can easily pre-measure, right? It's like, okay, 24.1 gives me a lot of room to still play the game, but 30.1 is like the point at which I can no longer put units within like the like sphere of influencing an objective. You know what I mean? Like it now becomes really uncomfortable for me. Um, so anywho, that's just my perspective as a top player. But I'm curious, like, what you think of the new book, like what you've seen of it, and it seems pretty strong to me.
So my I'll give you a potentially a different hot take is
Yeah.
that unless Sanguinary Guard are like 3x6 spammable popular,
Mm-hmm.
then I actually think the matchup gets better for you, because Vanguard veterans with a jump pack Sanguinary Priest is no longer a thing, because this jump pack priest is gone. So no 3-up, 4-up, 5-up units running around.
I
And
thankfully never ran into those, but that's like my
yeah,
nightmare. That's my nightmare. Is
no,
like
no,
two
they're terrible.
Deathwing Company brick or two Death Company bricks plus 1 or 2 of those. Like I could deal with the 2 Death Company bricks, even the one with the -1 damage, but I cannot deal with like a third or fourth. Like
Right, and then they're stupid durable, and they're actually really good at damage. So yeah, that going away, I think, is actually very helpful for you.
uh huh.
And I think in an odd way, Tau almost kind of mitigate the Sun to Sanguinius benefit, because okay, you get +2 strength and +1 attack, but like
You're
you were
already
killing
over.
whatever you charged anyway.
Exactly.
Like
You're already
it doesn't matter.
completely overkilling. Yeah, exactly. That's totally it.
So
And like it takes
um,
away being in Suns, like they like lose. Yeah, it's just they lose advance in charge from not being in Gladius. Like they don't have the reactive move. Yeah, it was just an easier matchup completely.
right. Yeah, so I think obviously, like you said, advance in charge changes the dynamic.
A lot.
But it's not army wide advance in charge.
Sure.
It's one unit,
Yep.
and so you can still kind of do a little bit of what you were saying. Is all right. I want this unit not to charge, and you could still screen that out, and then you just have to accept that they'll probably do it with a different unit.
Mhm.
And okay, you want to hit an 8 or a 9 and spend your CP, fine, whatever. Like
Mhm.
you just have you can't protect from everything, but I think you can still kind of like protect 1 or 2 things that you super care about. Like, all right, I moved this Riptide forward because I want to get an angle this turn, but I don't want you to charge him back, so I'm gonna like screen him out with stuff and things like that where you can't land,
Mhm.
and I just want to prevent that charge.
Yep. Yeah.
So I think that's still doable. If it was easy for, or if I'm not easy, but if it was favored for you before, I think it's probably still favored.
Yeah. The one that I am honestly most worried about is the Angelic Host, because I've found that armies that can pick up my trash for free. Like an example, right? If you're running Angelic Host and you have like the uppy downy and use Inceptors, right? A crafty Blood Angels player who could find places for Inceptors that could pick up like my scoring units without like I can't charge you without me getting to a corner to shoot back, or like maybe I don't get a guide into a 6-man unit and I'm only hitting on 4s with like a Riptide. Then it starts making things real awkward for me. Um, So I honestly think that that might be the more um, like the better detachment into an army like Tau, because the 3-inching Inceptors, like even like you could 3-inch rapid them, or like because of the lack of melee threat, you can get more aggressive, I think, and
Yep.
it makes things really, really awkward.
That's where you potentially think about taking your solo Dark Strider because he's your
Yeah,
112-inch denial,
yeah.
and just saying, all right, the turn the Inceptors are going to come down. I'm going to shove him behind the corner of this ruin or whatever,
Mhm,
and make sure that you can't drop in this area.
mhm.
You can drop over there, fine, whatever, but I want to prevent, even if it's just for a turn, that can honestly be enough sometimes because then they're down
Yep.
and you can shoot them. You'd be
Mhm,
like, all right, you can come down there, but there I can see you.
mhm,
You can't come down over here. And
mhm,
just taking a character like that, if you think that's like a weakness matchup and you think you're going to see it, just taking that and being like, all right, in any other game, he's just a guy that can go. You have a unit of Pathfighters, you can attach him if you want,
mhm,
or a guy that can just go be a one model thing.
mhm,
And then into the Blood Angel Angelic Host matchup, you can just be like, all right, the turn the Inceptors are going to drop, he's just going to be here, and then they're not going to be there.
mhm.
And then if he dies right after that, fine. But you denied the drop turn.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I
So
do like Darkstrider a lot. I think Mont'ka wants to play like controlling the board, and not having a piece like that makes it so that you can't use like the rest of your army to do it, right? Like
right.
because at least he like shores up your home for the most part. You could just put him on like a little piece of the corner, and it blocks out everything, which
Yep.
is really great. So yeah, I think we'll see. Very points dependent. I think like the with
Oh,
the
100%.
like their data sheets, like they do what you need them to do. Like they do the damage, they have decent durability, and it's just about like their cost appropriately. So yeah, I'm curious what they'll do with that. Um, yeah, is there anything like as you were watching the video that kind of came to mind as far as like the Tau sisters matchup is concerned? Like one thing that I mentioned that I'm curious what you think about is bringing Riptides from reserves. I've been playing around with it a little bit, but I think like to your point, if I want to be able to like put the most pressure on you possible, of like, hey, if you're gonna activate the Volgons, I have like an ace in the hole that can come off of a board edge, like forcing the opposing sisters player to really think before they push with the Volgons is kind of my thought process. So I'm curious what you think about that.
So if we're talking strictly Bringers of Flame,
Mm-hmm.
I think putting them in reserves to me
Just
is
the one,
something
one
that
out of three. Yeah.
just one. Okay, just one. I think one could be fine. The reason I would be skeptical is because the it's just less of a detriment to me just pushing everything at you. Because if
Mm-hmm.
I go
That's
first and you have
fair.
one less Riptide on the table,
Yeah, yeah.
then that's one less thing that can credibly kill the Volgons. And now I only have to hide from two of them.
Sure.
And maybe I'm okay getting shot by one, because okay, maybe you'll get a dev wound through
Yeah.
and kill one right off the rip, and then you'll do maybe three other wounds in which I can use two miracle dice
Yeah,
and
just
CP
hit a
reroll, and
four.
maybe you only kill one.
Yeah.
And then I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
But three makes it a lot harder to hide, and I think part of the thing is about the bringers matchup is you're either prepared for the push or you're trying to prevent them from wanting to push.
Uh huh.
And the more resources you're taking off the table, even if it's just one, is more incentive for me to just shove it all down your throat.
Yeah, fair enough.
So now, if you're prepared for that, you think you have a good crackback for it,
Yeah.
then totally fine. But there is a weird world where if I go first,
Yeah.
then that's two turns you have to hope to be contending for the board where you don't have that third Riptide on there.
That's fair.
And that feels a little iffy to me.
Yeah. It does feel like I'm looking at it from rose colored glasses because, again, if I place him in reserves and then I lose the defender roll off, then it's really awkward.
Correct. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
then,
Then if you had the ability to know that you had first drop
yeah.
or something, then
Uh huh.
then that to me is totally different.
Yeah.
Um, do you have anything that lets you redeploy into reserves?
No.
Okay. And I was going to say, then you could at least know whether you had the first setup. You wouldn't know first turn, but you would know if you had the screen down, at which case you'd be like, all right, now I feel way less bad chucking one into reserves.
Uh huh.
But,
Yeah, there's in Kalyan, you could do that. There's an ability to do that, but
mm,
I haven't seen people run it. It's pretty expensive. So one other question I had was like, and I'm not sure how deep your Tau knowledge is, but I talked to the top Tau player in the world last week, and his perspective on the Tau detachments was that Mont'ka wasn't very competitive. That Kaoyan and Retaliation are. Now, I would say like an important piece of context there is like the terrain difference is significant.
Sure. Yeah, and
Um,
he's in Europe.
exactly, UKTC versus in GW terrains, like it's just to me it's kind of like a different world. So I'm curious like what you think. Like the words he used, the phrase he used was that it's like inherently flawed. Um, so I'm curious what you think of that.
So I I think I see at least I think I understand the point he's trying to make,
Mm-hmm.
and I tend to agree with parts of it. I think it's Montcalm's good, but I think what he's trying to say is that your game plan, almost by virtue of the detachment's existence, is actually very linear
Mm-hmm.
because your detachment is telling you you do way better stuff in the first 3 turns.
Yeah.
And if you're not capitalizing on that, now you could have an individual game where it makes sense to not do that.
Mm-hmm.
But if on a grander scale you're not trying to play for the first 3 turns most of your games,
Mm-hmm.
then you're just wasting your detachment.
Yeah.
So as an opponent, it allows me to kind of have an understanding of what I think you're trying to do with
Yeah.
a relative amount of accuracy
Mm-hmm.
that something like Retaliation Cadre just wouldn't,
Mm-hmm.
because Retaliation Cadre is just take these units, but then here's all these rules to make them very dynamic.
Yeah.
And you have a lot more kind of different ways you can play that. Whereas Mont'ka, I think, okay, you are probably going to at some point in the first 3 turns try and make a push at me
Mm-hmm.
or do something aggressive, and so I'm going to plan for that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, and I think I might slightly disagree with him, but I'll concede to his knowledge and the fact that I think you could apply the same thing to Cao Yun,
Yeah.
just in the inverse, which is okay. I know you're playing for 5 turns,
Mm-hmm.
and you're playing for the back half of the game, and so maybe I try and push you really early when you don't have your rules.
Yeah.
So I think there could be some overlap there, but I definitely think I agree with him in terms of retaliation cadre. But you'll find that the trade off is that you better be a good player because that army is very technical,
Mm-hmm.
and it almost feels like Eldar in the sense that if you mess up, like you're gonna get destroyed, but it gives you a really high payoff for making good plays.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily so obvious what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah, and that is like I've played a few games of Retaliation. It is a lot of fun, and it is nice not to be totally telegraphed because in Kaoyan, pressure was brutal. Like you can
Right.
survive a turn, but like that second turn against like of Green Tide or the second turn against World Eaters or the
Yep.
second turn against Blood Angels is just brutal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and I think his point, like as far as like Kaoyan is concerned, is that that telegraph of turns 3, 4, and 5 is what you're playing for is less um, detrimental because most or now more than ever in Pry Nexus, that is a better line for the opponent anyways. So it's kind of
Sure.
like countering the lines of like opponents that want to play late game.
Well, and I can see that too because the linear play pattern in Montkov forces you to do something,
Yeah, exactly.
whereas the linear play pattern in Kaoyun
Forces
forces
the opponent.
me to
Yep,
stop you. So
exactly.
it is inherently less of a penalty for you in Kaoyun than it would be in Montkov
Yeah,
because one dictates it to me and one dictates it to you. So
sure.
yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, so yeah, I would tend to agree with them. Like I think I've played enough Mont'ka at this point. Like, I played a ton of Kalyan and I was getting I would just hit a bunch of rough matchups. Like Chaos Knights was an auto lose. Like a lot of those pressure matchups were just rough. So and
Yep.
Leviathan was much more like turn two focused, I would say, like early game focused, which is funny because once I get access to a detachment that's early game focused, like the game switches a little bit, right? And I just
Right.
get punished for like wanting to play something that's early game focused. So yeah, I'm curious how it'll play out. Like I'm gonna definitely try playing some Kalyan again. Um, and I am bringing Mont'ka to the to Champs Cup, so we'll see how that goes. I've got like a little bit of a wacky list that I'm gonna submit tomorrow. I'm gonna run triple Ghost Kill, triple Riptide.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I'm probably gonna be like an earlier defender, so I'll probably get a board
Yeah,
choice
clearly, yeah.
and throw the ghost skills out there. I've played a few games with it, not a ton, but it's definitely changing my matrix. Like I played again a game against Yukari recently, and I did not have a great game against Yukari, which typically would be like an auto win for me, um, because no SMS and that was kind of like the big thing was the lack of SMS, and then I had him drop first because I was like, all right, I want to see if I don't get to move block your entire beast packs, like all three of your beast packs, like how rough this would be, and it was kind of rough, to be honest.
Yeah.
Triple beast pack in my face. Um, so yeah, I'm curious, like what are you running for Champs Cup? Have you is that hush hush? Or are you willing to
No,
chat about
unfortunately,
that?
I had to drop. I couldn't
Oh
get the
really?
Friday off.
Oh
Yeah,
damn, I'm
yeah.
sorry, man.
I would have been running either my sister's list or my 18 inner circle companions list. That was the two it was going to be. It
Gross.
was probably going to be sisters just because I was the sisters player on the team. But
Fair. We do not have a sisters player on our team, which is
yeah, I would expect to face one probably every round.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
So,
we certainly will. Um, yeah, we'll see how that goes as far as like game plan is concerned. We're still trying to figure it out, you know.
yeah, the pairings is the biggest thing to just practice up on because it's not even necessarily how you pair into other armies. It's about kind of getting in the mindset of the other team and understanding how you think they will pair into you,
Mhm.
and just being able to be like, all right, well, I put down 3 Riptides and 3 Ghost Kills in Mont'ka as a defender. If I put that down as a defender, who do we think they're going to want to attack into that? And
Jeez.
then they give you 2 armies, and you're like, all right, which one would I want to choose? So just kind of having a understanding of matchups
Yeah.
and psychology is kind of a big thing because the amount of times I've seen people lose in just the pairing process, like we don't even really need to play the games. I can tell you how this round's going to go
Yeah.
because you just paired that into that, and that makes no sense at all.
Sure.
And that is the biggest like differential between a team that's like going there and playing their games versus a team that's going there and is going to do well
Yep.
is just the pairings because I watched um, there was a guy that I had on one of our teams once, and it was like, all right, he's playing knights, and okay, well, what are his bad matchups? Okay, it's these two. All right, can you? But I can beat all the other matchups, just not these two.
Mhm.
Okay, so we're going to make you the like second defender because then we've weeded out 1 or 2 of them, and then guarantee you get to pick one that isn't those guys.
Mhm.
And then cool, you never hit your bad matchup, and you just were our 18-2, 20-0 guy every round, and it was great.
Yeah.
But then we also had a small team event we did where we were inaccurately able to read that, and he got paired into bad matchups twice, and it's like, well, shit.
Yeah. We got wrecked.
So,
That's
yeah,
that's
I
what we're
think
trying to
that's the
figure out.
biggest thing.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out like I think like as a starting point, we're trying to make sure we have roles on the team, right? Okay, these are our dedicated attackers. This is kind of like what we're predicting to be defenders in the meta,
Right.
and who at least have like 2 guys to go into them. Um, so we'll see. Like I don't know if this list is like the strongest teams list, but it at least has like a game plan. It has an identity. We'll see if that identity is like a strong one or not. But
I mean, I think if you're a defender with that type of list,
mhm,
I see it very unlikely, especially since you get to pick your matchup.
mhm,
It's very unlikely for you to have 2 bad ones.
mhm.
That I see you're kind of the guy that's been like, I'm going to at least get you guys a 10.
Yeah,
At
that's
least
the
get you a
hope.
10.
That's the hope. The ones that are spooky, like I can do fine into Marines, but I would say the more I think about it, the more I am worried about like the heavy skews in either direction. Like if they have a mass demons or like mass anti like tank guard, completely tank guard, then I just have a lot of strength 8 and strength 9 with a couple hammerheads behind it, and mass hordes like I'm not running the SMS that I'm used to, and I only have one breacher team. So um, that's what I'm concerned is if they have two opposite ends of the spectrum. Now, if one of those goes into me, maybe that makes some of our other matchups better, which is
Sure.
something that I'm
Um,
totally willing to do.
yeah.
But
And sometimes you just got to fall on a grenade. A lot of the SKU lists, if they're pairing them the way we paired our SKU lists, are going to be paired as defenders,
mhm.
so they don't hit the hard counter.
Yeah, fair.
So I think you may be able to escape that a little bit, and that should generally be a good indication of a better point spread for you.
Yeah. So we'll see. I think most of all, I just wanted to like play something fun and play something a little bit less vanilla for me because I've been running
Right.
like triple Riptide, double Hammerhead, double Devilfish, double
Yeah,
Breacher,
yeah,
Pathfinder,
I get
Dark
it.
Strider forever, you know?
Yeah,
So like, like 3 units switch or whatnot. So I'm excited to mess around with some other stuff. And oh, I wanted to talk Kroot by the way, because you were planning on running a Kroot army for a little bit there.
yeah, and then they got nerfed into the dirt for no reason.
Do you still have? Yeah, they did get nerfed in the dirt for no reason. Do you still have that army? Do you still own it?
I sold it.
You
Full
sold it.
confession. It didn't even. It was at the point with like the quadruple nerf
Uh huh.
with
Yeah,
the
you're
no
just like screw
redeploy after
this.
you know goes first, the
Yeah.
one unit back,
Yep.
the there was something else. There was like two other things that they nerfed.
They nerfed a bunch of. It was the redeploy
The
because
redeploy.
they
It
had
was
the
the one unit regenerate.
loan op,
Um,
18-inch
the
loan op.
yeah the loan op thing. It's like because I wanted to play 18 rampagers, and it's
Yeah.
like okay, well that's just not a thing anymore.
No.
And it didn't even feel like a like because look, I mean I'm going to be playing Imperial Agents, so as a pure army
When?
because Sisters and Marines are my tournament armies,
Uh huh.
and I always like having a palette cleanser army like Chaos Knights and something else that I can just take to an RT, couple RTTs or a small GT
Yep.
and just play and not be like I'm still playing to win,
Yep.
but I don't have to brain drain myself like the way I have to play with Sisters. Because Sisters, even in a game where you feel like you're really strong into,
Mhm.
it's still a brain drain army because it's so technical.
Yeah.
And I can take an army that's totally different and just have a palette cleanser army and just be like, all right, this tournament that's just not going to be my experience.
Mhm.
But like, I will play an army that is clearly not the top of the meta
Sure.
because it has fun components to it.
Yeah.
And to me, after that nerf, they just gutted all the fun parts about Kroot,
Sure.
where I just feel like I wouldn't even enjoy my time playing it.
Yeah, that's
Like,
fair.
I don't enjoy an army just because it can win all my games that I play. Like, I want to win with an army I play, but there has to be fun elements to it. And the Kroot army prior to the nerfs had that.
Mhm.
I know they just don't.
Yeah.
And so it was just not appealing anymore.
Sad. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that they lower the points enough to reflect the changes in the Kroot
Right.
detachment, right? To the point where I can potentially even like start sprinkling some into other detachments. Like it would be cool for rampagers to actually be price appropriate. Like I believe they're
Correct.
more dude, I believe they're more expensive than Thunderwolf Cav. Or the
Well, I
same
saw I was
price.
about to make that point. Is like
What
we
like
should
what are we
not live in
doing?
a world where Thundercav and Rampagers are even comparable points wise.
But I'm pretty sure rampagers
I
are
think
one.
they're even.
They're the same. Yeah, are they the
They're
same?
the
Yeah.
same.
That's so
It's
dumb.
180 for 6,
Yeah. And like
which is more of a problem with Thunderwolf Cav being 30 points a model, but also Rampagers shouldn't be.
yeah, no, rampagers are 110 for 3. So they're 220 for 6.
Oh, maybe they are more expensive, or
Either
whatever they are. I
yeah,
think
it's
they're
too much.
virtually the same,
Yeah, for
but
something
it's
without an invul inherently.
it still should not be.
Yeah, exactly. It shouldn't be. Same thing with like Kroot carnivores. Like they're literally cultists. Like what are we doing here? Like why are they 10 points more than cultists?
To me, that was something where they overvalued sticky objectives in OC2.
Exactly. Yeah.
And sticky objectives OC2 are cool, but Tau don't have a problem with OC2.
Yeah, we don't.
You have a unit you already want to take in like most detachments that's OC2.
Yeah, and like
So
the like even the strike team is just like straight better because
yeah,
it can guide. And it
right,
has -1 to wound and shooting, like which isn't
right,
negligible. Like it's kind of
yeah,
annoying. And it's the exact same price point. So like, what are we
yeah.
doing here? Um, so yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens with the Kroot detachment. I'm hopeful that they. I also think the Lone Spear is really dope.
He is
Um,
cool. Yeah, I wish he wasn't what 110 points,
yeah, I think
90 points, whatever
he's
it is.
90. He's 90.
Yeah, 90.
It's a
That's right.
little too expensive. I think it's kind of hard to price a guy like that because he has good rules.
He
Like
has good rules. Yeah,
he has a loan op, he has a reactive move, or not a reactive move. He has move shoot move. So like
correct. Yeah.
it's gonna be hard to like justify like him going down, but we'll see. I
The,
mean,
the the crew detachment felt like a rug pull to me because we got a cool detachment and a battle
yeah,
box, and then immediately the detachment gets nerfed.
Well, yeah, because
So
they were just addressing all the other armies that were still, like Necrons. Who else was that getting at? Like Green Tide, I guess. Was it Green
yeah,
Tide? One of them?
that's the problem. Well, it was the guard bringing back infinite
Oh, it was the
units.
Guard. Yeah, yeah,
But that's the problem with to me with overarching nerfs that
yeah.
really only target one army.
Uh huh. Yeah,
This is where I think the
collateral
Imperial
damage.
Agents book. I know people hate the Imperial Agents book as a concept, trying to make Imperium players buy a second book,
Yep.
and I get that, and I agree with that. But what I think is getting lost is conceptually the idea, and I think this is pretty important,
I like this idea
is
too.
that they're testing, is my assumption, the ability to point things differently based on where you take them.
Yeah, what
So,
rules do you have
like,
access to?
this unit is this points in the Imperial Agents book because it's clearly a different book, but if you take this assassin or whatever as an ally,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to make you pay more for that because you're just taking army that's good and then filling your weaknesses.
Yep.
So you shouldn't pay the same. You should pay more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a future of 40K that feels a lot more balanced, especially if they're going to do this detachment route, is variable points cost
Yep.
where, and granted, I'm sure it will be hard to balance initially, but it's something I'd like to see happen because you have a detachment like the Kroot detachment where I should be getting some of these things for a different points cost than they would be in retaliation cadre or whatever.
Yep.
Or why shouldn't you have to pay, a couple more points for breachers in Mont'ka where they're wildly better than you would be if I took breachers in Kroot hunting pack,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So I think I'm hoping that's what we're getting with Imperial Agents, where this is just a testing ground
Yeah.
because it's easy, because Allies is already a thing like that. And I'm hoping that maybe this is an 11th edition thing where we get variable points cost for things
Mm-hmm.
because that would solve a lot of issues that something like the Kroot detachment has is you can just really kind of balance it within itself.
Yep.
As opposed to, hey, I'm playing Sisters of Battle, oh, Repentia are really good in Penitent Host because they can have one nuke anything in the game unit.
Mm-hmm.
All right, make them 180 points. Now nobody wants to take them in any detachment, and sometimes not even in Penitent Host.
Yeah. Sure.
So like, why make Repentia suck for all the three other detachments when they're only a problem in Penitent Host?
Uh huh. Yeah. And
So that's what I hope to see, and what I hope that this codex indicates.
sure. And there's more. There are like little examples here and there of them doing that also with like unit size stuff, like broadsides, right? They have when people were talking about running the triple missile broadsides, and you could
Right.
like stack buffs on that unit like crazy, and then they have full hit rerolls, extra AP, full wound rerolls, and then they changed the point cost to like it was like 90, 180, 300 for the three man, which I think
Yeah.
so. I think they are moving towards that. The only thing, like, as someone who joined the game like a year or so ago, like they're just gonna have to do this in a way that's like not confusing, basically. Like, can you streamline this in a way that's not confusing? Because as a newer player who like entered the end of ninth, like that was a shit show for me. Like coming in and like warlord traits and like everybody has 40 stratagems and like the second
Yeah.
like the faction specific secondaries. Like, what the hell are we doing here? Like, this is
I
so
like the bookkeeping in this edition more than any other edition. It's so much more easy to understand.
yeah, like, and even just building a list with crisis suits, like, what the hell am I doing? Like,
Right.
I pick a different weapon on every unit, like, you know what I mean? I'm like, this is so
Yep.
confusing. Like, the points cost, and like, okay, if I put the second weapon on the crisis unit, that one costs a little bit more than the first weapon. So, anywho, I think there's a world in which they could do it in a way that's not confusing, but I could see a newer player being like, wait, what the heck? Like, why is the Calidus, 130 points in my Space Marines list? Or whatever the point cost is, but like it says in
Yeah.
this book that it's supposed to be 90 points or whatever.
And
It's a
I
small
think it
thing.
would be a I think it would be a two-part thing. It would be one, them being able to openly confess if they did it. Hey guys, this is radically different.
Yep.
This isn't going to be perfect at launch, but we
Yep.
think this is a way healthier way to balance the game because we want most of the detachments to be viable.
Mhm.
And so this is a good way to do it. And then also have it be where not every unit is different in every detachment. You could probably, if you took Space Marines,
Mhm.
you could probably keep 90% of the data sheets the same points across most detachments
Yep.
because there's not much to a negligible difference between a lot of the data sheets in different detachments.
Yep.
But you could go in and you could say, okay, Inner Circle companions are going to cost more in Gladius Task Force because they just get so much more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or Eradicators are going to cost more in Gladius Task Force because they go from an S tier unit in Gladius to not even played in other detachments.
Yeah.
So that is a huge unit disparity,
Yep.
right? So you can't. That's something where you could easily look at and be like, all right, plus 3 points a model or whatever on Eradicators and Gladius
Sure.
or whatever they think is right because okay, yeah, still take this unit, but we're acknowledging that Gladius Eradicators with Fire Discipline are not the same as First Company Task Force Eradicators.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that's my kind of one wish list thing that I hope to see that this codex and a couple things they've done in data slates, like you said about the Riptides,
Mm-hmm.
and something that I think they did with Devastators or some unit like Devastators where the front half of the guys is expensive and then the back
Drukari.
half of the guys that get no additional weapons are
Drukari
much
Scourge.
cheaper. Because you're just getting body bags. They don't get special weapons.
Yeah,
Why
yeah.
should that half be as expensive as the first half?
Yeah, Drukari Scourge. Because
Yeah.
the last 5 don't get any special weapons. They are just literally bodies, and it's like way cheaper than the first half.
Yeah, and it should be because honestly,
Yeah,
most people still won't spring for the 10.
they won't.
But if you wanted to, for whatever reason, it's actually a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're like, yeah, actually, like that's like half the cost, and maybe I really want to keep this unit alive or whatever, and maybe
There's a
you're
lot
just
of
somebody who wants
indirect
to
in the
run 10.
meta.
Who knows?
Yeah,
It's something that isn't just a lol no.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious where they end up going with it. I think it'll be interesting to see how GW innovates because I think they are like doing a pretty damn good job of like identifying issues with like the meta or like list building and like addressing them in a way that's like the least detrimental
Right.
to like the player base at large. Which correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seemed like earlier editions that wasn't necessarily the case.
Not at all. I mean, the earlier editions because I started in fourth. It
Mm-hmm.
would be here's your codex for the edition, which not every army got.
Mm-hmm.
Space Marines always got one, and everybody else would just be whenever they're ready to release it. So I know Dark Eldar got a refresh in I think 5th edition, but prior to their 5th edition codex, they had been playing off of a 2nd edition codex. So they skipped 3rd and 4th edition without a book,
Jeez.
and I think Orcs had a 3rd edition codex until 5th edition, and
Mm-hmm.
you had armies like that where it's just they released it when they wanted to.
Uh huh.
And maybe they would release an FAQ if they had like a grammar mistake, but there was no such thing as a balance update or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that.
Wow.
Um, and the only time I can, in fact, the one weird one was when 6th edition 40K released.
Mm-hmm.
It was so hated, so reviled that instead of fixing it, they just after I think a year and a half or 2 years, they just released 7th edition.
Really?
As opposed to their 3-year release cycle, instead of patching the edition back then, this is what they used to do: is just all right, new edition.
Yeah, yeah.
And 7th edition, retrospectively, not a fun edition balance wise, but it was so much better than 6th edition
Uh huh.
that people just overlooked that. 7th edition was like the prequels for Star Wars for 40K editions,
Okay.
where it wasn't actually contemporaneously that good,
Yeah.
but people look back at it fondly because it wasn't 6th edition.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like that's what the balance used to be. So they've definitely gone in the right direction. I'm not a GW bootlicker, but I think people go too far the other way
I
too,
think
where
so. Yeah.
they're so opposed to giving GW credit for anything.
Yeah.
Like the game in a balanced way, how they handle it is way better than it used to be.
Yeah.
And I think part of that too is having actual tournament players and good tournament players like Josh Roberts
Mm-hmm.
be part of the design
Dude,
team
that is a sick
that
move for
can
them.
give them input and be like, this is an actual problem or this is something that the player base wants to see.
Yeah.
Because seeing them do things like that data slate, the first one where they went into units like Grey Knights and actually changed the data sheet,
That was
as
sick.
opposed to just make cheaper or make more expensive. Like that's not a fun fix.
Mm-hmm.
Changing the unit and being like, all right, actually, we're going to change the unit and we're going to make it more expensive,
Yeah.
but now you want to take it because it's good.
Yeah.
Like that type of fix, that was innovative and that's good. That's the kind of fix that like keeps people coming. Because I know I used to play Hearthstone a lot, and if anybody's played a game like
I
that,
played a lot of Hearthstone actually.
yeah,
Many
their
years.
balance fix is just more mana cost, less mana cost, and they've occasionally gone in and changed cards, but it always felt like it worked, but it wasn't a fun change.
Yeah.
It was just, okay, this card's now no longer playable, or it's like actually playable.
Yeah.
And whereas I think going in and acknowledging, okay, points is not, it's like an easy balance fix, but if something's fundamentally wrong, that needs a bigger change.
Mhm.
And I think that's the kind of input that they wouldn't get without having guys like that on board.
100%. And I think, like, to your point about like people not really receiving GW well, I think it's like, as a newer player, I do think GW is doing a great job, and like you yourself and like all the other old heads at Fight Club and whatnot, um, you guys have like been through the ringer, so there's like an element of cynicism that's just present, omnipresent,
You're waiting
there.
for the rug pull.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone's just like, when is this gonna turn to shit? Um,
Right.
and one thing I think maybe this is a hot take. I'm curious what you think of it. Is I think that 10th edition, and I think this latest announcement that they're gonna like there aren't as many codexes coming at the end of the year. I think 10th edition is gonna be a longer edition. It seems like GW has, and what do I know? It's just but it just seems like this. Oops. It seems like they're pretty happy with where the balance is at, and like why ruin a good thing.
Right.
And they can continue to like add flavor, and they've shown themselves to do a good job of like addressing weaknesses across the game, or like addressing really weak armies. So yeah, I'm curious, like, what do you think of that? Do you think that what's your opinion? Do you think that they're going to stay with this edition
So
for a little
my
longer? Or... Yeah.
history tells me that after 3 years we're going to get a new edition,
Yeah.
because that's roughly what we've gotten. And until I see something that isn't that, I'm just going to assume that's the case.
Mhm.
What I would like to see is, if 10th edition isn't a longer edition, I would hope that 11th edition is 10.5,
Mhm.
where it's a re-release of the rulebook, where it's not, it's reincorporated all the FAQs and erratas and everything we've had, and
Mhm.
it's all the streamlined rules. And okay, you can have a new starter set or whatever, but it's not a fundamental change. There's not two or three things that they just wildly change, like they totally change how ruins work and things like that, and just fundamentally change the game.
Mhm.
I don't want to see that. Now, we don't need obviously an index reset, but what I would like, and I think what would give people a lot of goodwill, because people keep saying this, okay, give us digital rules. It's never going to happen, or at least not for a long time. They make
Yeah.
too much money off of selling codexes,
Yeah.
and that's just the reality of it. Now, what I would like to see is, I would like to see them sell me a digital code
Yeah.
that is maybe 5% off, 10% off of the actual book, and I'll just buy that. I'm happy to pay for the rules, but I don't want the book.
Oh,
So
really? That's
I
interesting.
I would like that.
Yeah.
Um, but what I would like to see is, I would like to see 11 be like, okay, here's an addition, but it's basically 10 continued. Because I think one of the things that gives people a lot of bad will about GW is, okay, if my codex is the end of the codex cycle in 10th edition, and then the next edition comes out, first of all, if it's an index reset, which obviously I don't think it would be, but then it's totally invalidated.
Mhm.
But also, okay, now I got the last codex in 10th edition, so I'm powerful for a couple months. Then the new edition comes, and I'm actually the weakest codex now, because now I got the codex that was good for 2 months,
Mhm.
and now the other people are getting codexes that were written for 11th edition,
Yep.
and now they're going to be fundamentally stronger. And that felt like a really shitty thing. I had to wait 2.5 years for my book, and now I'm at the bottom of the pile again.
Mhm.
So I would love to see 11th be an edition where it's written like it's 10th edition, just with updates.
Yep.
So a codex like Space Marines or Necrons that came out at the beginning of 10th doesn't feel like a codex that, while it works within the constraints of an edition, is clearly an outdated codex.
Mhm.
That's what I would like to see, because I think that would engender a lot of goodwill towards them, where it's like, okay, we're making sure that all of your stuff feels like it belongs in this edition,
Sure.
without you having to then buy another book.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I remember the Guard Codex at the end of ninth. I remember it. I mean, I wasn't super aware of like how the meta was at that point, but I remember playing a few games into it and hearing people talk about it. I remember it being really, really seemed really, really damn good.
Well, so the Guard Codex had two problems. One, it was one of the first. I don't think it was the first. I think the Orcs were, where they had the Codex inside of a special box,
Okay.
like a special
Oh yeah, yeah,
Cadian box or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
And so you got the book, but you couldn't play it at tournaments for like 3 or 4 months
That
until they
was tough.
officially released the book. And it was very frustrating because by the time that time frame had come around,
It was over.
10th edition was like 2.5 months away.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you had Guard do well at tournaments for like 2 months, but they had been operating off of an 8th edition codex
No way.
up until the end of ninth edition.
Oh my
And
god.
so they were very outdated. And once they finally got their and it felt like an 8th edition codex.
Yeah.
Once they got their update, it was just like, all right, here's 10th edition index reset.
Mm-hmm.
And
Gross.
I don't blame Guard players for being pissed off about that.
Yeah, I'd be super upset too. Yeah, to your point, I wasn't really picking up what you were saying until now, which is like if an army has to wait through 11th edition, their 10th edition codex still being valid through some part of 11th.
Right. And like the Guard book was quote worked in ninth edition, even though it was an 8th edition book,
Yeah, but
but
it
it
wasn't.
very much felt like it wasn't playing the same game as other books.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I would like to see in 11th is that I would like to see it be like a continuation of 10th, where if I have a Space Marine Codex that was at the front end of the release cycle,
Mm-hmm.
or Necrons, because I guess Space Marines get a book every edition.
Yeah.
If it's something like Necrons that had something at the front end of the release cycle, if they have to wait till the tail end of 11th edition, I want them to be. I want their 10th edition codex to feel like it's still playing the same game,
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
opposed to like the Guard Codex that was like this codex is clearly a book written for the last edition.
Mm-hmm. That is going to be it for today's video, everybody. I appreciate you sticking to the end. If you did enjoy today's video, if you could interact for the algorithm, just shoot me a like, comment, subscribe to the channel if you aren't yet. I would greatly appreciate it. I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.